name is Don Rosa. I was born in 1951 in Louisville, Kentucky, USA. Born to a very old Italian construction company family. My college education is in civil engineering. I've got a degree in civil engineering because I knew that's what I was going to do for a living. I was the boss's son, so I was highly qualified for my position. I had one sibling, a sister, and she was 11 years older than I was. She was a comic book hoarder. So she had every comic book that she got since she was about 8 or 9 years old until she was still buying them when she was a teenager. So the moment I was born, I was surrounded already by years worth of comic books, American comic books, and in those days comic books sold really well in America compared to how they sell now, which is pitifully bad. The most popular comic books in the United States were Karl Barks's Donald Duck and Uncle Scrooge comics. He was the creator of Uncle Scrooge, and actually even his Donald Duck was a new, like a reboot of the Disney Donald Duck. It really wasn't the same character. He recreated Donald Duck for comic book. And those were the best-selling comic books in the history of the United States. So that's what I grew up with. And like most everybody, I loved Karl Marx's Uncle Scrooge comics. And I spent my childhood writing and drawing my own comic books. Nobody ever saw them. I just entertained myself. And they were always like Marx comics. They were comedy adventures, like his stories. But I knew I was going to run the family construction company, so it never occurred to me to do it for a living. And I was a big comic book collector. I've got one of the biggest comic book collections in America, all kinds of comics, going back into the 40s. So I was always a comics enthusiast and amateur cartoonist, and the Disney quote-unquote comics disappeared from America and the superheroes took over because sales were dropping. But in 1987, a tiny company got the license to publish reprints of the old Disney comics, and I saw that as my opportunity to write and draw one Uncle Scrooge adventure, which was the dream of my childhood. And I called up the editor, and he said, okay, go ahead. So I did one, and they published it, and I figured I was satisfied. That's all I wanted to do. But that first professional comic book that I ever did was nominated as the best story of the year. Didn't win, so that caught my attention. And pretty soon I thought, well, there was no money in the comic books, but I really wasn't interested in my grandfather's 85-year-old construction company, so maybe that'd be a more fulfilling life if I could write and draw Uncle Scrooge comics. I started doing that. Within 2 years I found out that Donald Duck and Uncle Scrooge comics were still the best-selling comic books around the world, but not in North America. So within 2 years I was working for Egmont, a company in Copenhagen, but they published Disney comics all around the world, and I was working for them. But I never thought that anybody noticed my comics because I knew I'm an amateur, and I knew I was a fan artist, that's all. A few times a year I'd have one story in these comics, and that would be enough. But within like 1 year, readers were apparently responding that they liked my stories the best. It was because they could tell I was a fan. They could tell I was working a lot harder than the pay indicated. Other people's comics were like 7 panels per page, and mine 11 panels per page, because I'm writing like 30-page stories and cramming them into 10, because I'm having a good time. I think readers would look at that and think, for somebody to put so much effort into such bad art, he must be enjoying himself. And then they enjoyed reading it. My artwork and my stories apparently, and still, appealed to other fans. Not to the entire readership, but to the real fans. So I'm the most successful fan artist that I think there's ever been. It's the Flashman series by MacDonald Fraser. And I think anybody who's a Uncle Scrooge fan, a Marx fan, or maybe my fan, would get a kick out of these. They're very solidly based in history, very correct history. And the character, just like my Uncle Scrooge, like in my Life and Times of Scrooge, he happens to be in every important event in history in his youth, which is pretty preposterous. And people said, how can you figure out that? The same thing I'd asked MacDonald Fraser about his Flashman character. He's in every important occurrence in history in the 1800s. You say, how could that be possible? I'm the author. I want it to be. So I just make it that way. But, you know, what's not to understand? Okay, so it's the works of MacDonald Fraser.